Hey, thanks for pressing play on this episode of The Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway, a nostalgic look back at my favorite Rangers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm your host, Tom Browning. Thanks for listening. Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of The Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. Tom here. Today I would like to talk about one of my favorite all-time New York Rangers, and that is the captain, number 8, Bob Nevin. I started following the Rangers probably back during the 64-65 seasons when the team was in the midst of an incredible struggle to make the playoffs. It was really the worst of times for New York Ranger fans back in the late 50s, early 60s. It was an organization that had lost their way, an organization that found it very difficult to put wins together, and of course, leading to the inability to make the playoffs. And it wasn't until the 66-67 season, which is now kind of coined as the rise of the new New York Rangers, when they became a hockey powerhouse. But back in 64, the Ranger management really needed to find players that had a winning pedigree, that had championship caliber, that had proven themselves in the big games. And one of the things the Rangers did was they traded one of their fan favorites and Hall of Famers, Andy Bathgate, along with Don McKinney, to the Toronto Maple Leafs for Bob Nevin. Bob Nevin wore number 8 with the New York Rangers. He played 7 seasons with the New York Rangers, which was longer than he played with any other club in the National Hockey League. He had stints, again, starting off with the Leafs and then traded to the Rangers. And then he finished his career with the Minnesota North Stars and the Los Angeles Kings, where it was with the Kings that he had his most productive offensive seasons to finish his career. But it was really the beginning of his career, his first several seasons with the Leafs, and then his 7 years, 5 of which captain of the New York Rangers, where Bob Nevin really made a name for himself in the National Hockey League. It was back in the 1961 season where Bob Nevin finished second in the Calder Trophy balloting, which, of course, as you folks well know, is the Rookie of the Year award. He actually finished second to his teammate and future Hall of Famer, Davey Keon. And Davey Keon was a tremendous hockey player in his own right. But along with Davey Keon and Frank Mahovlich and some other great players with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Bob Nevin led the Maple Leafs to 2 consecutive Stanley Cups in 1962 and 1963. So Bob Nevin had that winning pedigree, that championship caliber resume that the Rangers were so desperate in need of back in the mid-60s. And it was in 1964, as I mentioned, that they traded for Bob Nevin, giving up Hall of Famer and fan favorite Andy Bathgate along with Don McKinney. And it was 2 years on the New York Rangers really shaping the clubhouse, helping the youngsters on the club to learn about what it takes to win in the National Hockey League. And Bob Nevin earned the position of captain in 1966. During the 1966-67 season. And that also happened to be the first season that the Rangers made the playoffs in many, many a year. And again, that was his first season as captain of the New York Rangers. And again, this was where the rise of the Rangers really came into play. This was the year that started the Rangers in their quest to become a powerhouse organization within the NHL. And they became that. They became a powerhouse, consistent, perennial Stanley starting in 1966-67. But it culminated in a Stanley Cup final against the Boston Bruins in 1972. But again, it was the great Bob Nevin, number 8, that really brought that winning attitude to the Rangers, starting in 64, but culminating in a winning season in 66-67 and making the playoffs for the very first time. They did lose to the Montreal Canadiens in 4 games, losing the 4th game at Madison Square Garden in overtime. And again, Ranger fans remember, and I remember listening to Marv Albert on radio vividly, and hearing as he was streaking down the left wing, Red Berenson, who at the time was called Gordy Berenson by Ranger fans, hitting the post, and then John Ferguson coming down moments later and in the scramble in front, beating Eddie Giacomin to eliminate the Rangers from the Stanley Cup playoffs in the opening round of 1966-67. But Bob Nevin really was the first captain for the New York Rangers, starting the winning tradition for the New York Rangers back in the late 60s and into early 70s. Bob Nevin had 307 goals in his career, 419 assists for 726 points. As I mentioned, he finished second to his teammate Davey Keon for Rookie of the Year in 1961. But his probably a biggest moment with the Rangers, and I again remember this vividly, watching it on Channel 9, was when the Rangers eliminated the Toronto Maple Leafs during the 71-72 playoffs. I checked that, make that the 70-71 playoffs. And Bob Nevin, Game 6 in Toronto, scoring the overtime goal, catapulting the Rangers to the second round of the playoffs against the Chicago Blackhawks. And I'll never forget that game. It was a harrowing game. It was Game 6. And Toronto, just prior to that rush up ice where Nevin scored, was putting all sorts of pressure on Eddie Giacomin. They had a sustained bit of pressure, peppering Eddie Giacomin with potentially could have been the game-winning goal for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But the Rangers cleared the zone, and I have a vivid recollection of Bob Nevin going down the right side from the right faceoff circle, putting the puck in the net, and advancing the Rangers to the second round of the playoffs during the 70-71 season. It was a great game. It was really a watershed moment for the Rangers, proving that they could win a playoff game on the road in overtime against one of the top powerhouses in the National Hockey League, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Unfortunately, the Rangers, looking for a power play specialist back in 71-72, made a trade with the Minnesota North Stars to acquire Bobby Russo. And Bobby Russo, for you Ranger fans, was really a power play specialist. And he went on to do some very, very important things for the Rangers during the 72 playoffs, leading to a Stanley Cup final loss to the Boston Bruins. But it was an important trade for the Rangers. They got a very good player in Bobby Russo, who had some very good years with the Montreal Canadiens early in his career. And who knows, we might do a show on Bobby Russo later on in the year. But Bob Nevin was an important captain for the New York Rangers. He really started the winning tradition with the New York Rangers. From the Minnesota North Stars, Bob Nevin finished his career in the NHL with the LA Kings, where he actually had his finest offensive seasons. He scored over 70 points in 75-76, and he again brought that same leadership to the LA Kings in the middle 70s. He actually went on to take on an opportunity with the fledgling World Hockey Association with the Edmonton Oilers. Didn't play much, and he finished his career in the WHA with the Edmonton Oilers. So that wraps up the first installment of The Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway, focusing on number 8, Bob Nevin. Thank you for listening. This has been a Go Tommy Boy production.